Drew, let's talk about these pass catchers, man. There's a lot of them. You got, what, 7 in the top 32, right? You think about the NFL draft, that's what we model it after. You can go a lot of different ways here, but we got to talk about tight ends as well. There's only one of those guys that are ranked inside the top 32 as a 5-star in that status. Well, let's start with the Freaky Four. That's what the boys are calling it. That's what we came up with. Luke Reynolds, Oyster Boy OG. If you don't know what that is, this guy can play a little bit of football. Trey'Dez Green, Carter Nelson, Christian Bentancur. But let's start with the guy with a beautiful head of hair. This guy going to be making plays at State College for a long time coming.
Cooper, he tested off the charts, and really he turned our heads at the Elite 11 Finals quarterback event. Luke Reynolds caught more passes than anyone. He might have had 100 receptions over the 3-day tournament that was designed for quarterbacks. What stood out to us about Luke Reynolds, why he finished inside the 32, as a senior, he played defense. He was a safety, a 6'4" safety, and that to us signals, all right, this guy can be an inline blocker. You think about some of the tight ends that have come out of Penn State over the years. I think Luke Reynolds is the next great one to suit up for the Nittany Lions. Love me some Luke Reynolds. I love all these guys. You said it, Freaky Four, all of them, multi-sport athletes. Why is that important? 16 tight ends drafted last year in the NFL draft. All 16 of them played other sports in high school and at a high level. I'm talking about Sam Laporta, Dalton Kincaid. Those guys were good basketball players. Trey'Dez Green, you want to go there with Trey'Dez Green? Could have played Division I college basketball. He's headed to LSU. Our guy, Gabe Brooks, who does he compare him to? Plaxico Burress, that big perimeter target. He had an excellent senior season there. And I think he's another weapon for the Tigers.
Yeah, you think about Trey'Dez Green, the basketball background. You talked about a guy we didn't really have a lot of data on, right? We love the multi-sport context. He transfers to Zachary High School, Louisiana as a senior, and this is a guy who just absolutely balled out. You talk about a mismatch nightmare. LSU going to be able to kind of get him involved early. I think Kamarian Penton, another name, you think about that. Both those guys, very similar backgrounds, right? I want to go back to Luke Reynolds for a second because this is a guy we had in the top 32 for a while. He kind of had this meteoric rise within our rankings, and I think a lot of people were like, where'd this guy come from? Well, for us, we saw the testing data. It was a 4.56 40. It was a 4.2 shuttle, and then a 38-inch vertical, and then you see the senior tape, right, out of Connecticut, and you better be like, listen, if you're playing football in Connecticut, you better do a little bit of everything. He dominated, right? So you feel really good about the box checker that Luke Reynolds is. I feel really good about the fit there as well. Trey'Dez Green heading to Baton Rouge. Drew, number 3. How about our man here, Carter Nelson, 8-man football? You want to talk about a guy that does a little bit of everything. This guy reminds me of Nikola Jokic on the basketball court. Maybe that's a little bit of Rich, the Joker. But, I mean, you watch the highlights. It's hard to take a lot from 8-man football, but like I said, with playing football in Connecticut, you better be able to do everything. Well, you better be almost an Olympian-level athlete if you play 8-man football and are going to be ranked inside the top 50. Drew, he's not that far away from that, in my opinion, Carter Nelson.
And we got him at the All-American Bowl. We didn't know how he was going to adjust, seeing as he hadn't been in an 11-on-11 setting. I thought it took a few days. He got adjusted, and then he flew out to Hawaii for the Polynesian Bowl in the game, catching passes from Dylan Raiola. I'm like, this is the Carter Nelson I thought he could be. Comes from a town with one stoplight. I think that, there's not a lot of people there. I think what stands out about Carter Nelson is Chris Hummer, great story. He wrote on 247sports.com, just kind of profiling it. What the vision for Matt Rule and the Cornhuskers, they're going to get this guy involved. He also points out, 300-yard drive of the golf ball straight.
I like that a lot.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of jealous there, but might be the heaviest pole vaulter. Can we also talk about Christian Bentancur? This is my guy. Headed to Clemson. Broke a ton of records there in Illinois. Final prep game, 21 catches. We saw him, too, in the All-American Bowl. We saw him out at the Polynesian Bowl. You think about Clemson not using the transfer portal, but Dabo Swinney likes to use his tight ends. I think Christian Bentancur, All-State honorable mention in basketball. That is important. Again, we talked about Sam Laporta, Dalton Kincaid. I think he could play relatively early. Someone we didn't have a ton of verified data on, and then he was a box checker during that live exposure.
This feels very Pro Football Focus freshman All-American Christian Bentancur. Yeah, I mean, Drew, you mentioned we didn't have a lot of verifieds. You talked about that. We get to see him in the postseason, not only at the All-American Bowl, but parts of our staff got to see him in Hawaii as well. Just dependable, steady Eddie, and when you play that position, it's so much more of a subjective position than it is objective. What I mean by that, it's a feel position. It's an instinctive position. You have to know where the soft spots are in the defense, how to make yourself open and available. I think he's going to be one of Cade Klubnik's best friends very quickly within that offense. And you talked about Garrett Riley, a guy that knows how to get those guys the football. I expect big things out of Christian Bentancur. Drew, let's go down the list and let's get to these pass catchers. And we talked about the Freaky Four. How about the Fab Four, right? Let's start at the top. A guy that you know very well. The kids would say, hey, that is him. Well, that is Jeremiah Smith, the first ever receiver to be ranked number 1 in 24/7 sports history. You see the pro comp there. Julio Jones, for the kids that might not remember Julio Jones, he was a dog. Jeremiah Smith is also a dog. Drew, you've seen this guy since he was like 13. Tell me why he ended up as the number 1 player in the country.
I tweeted it out a few weeks ago, right? Doing some self-scouting, going back to our initial top 100 for the 2024 class. Jeremiah Smith was 38th, okay? At the time, he was like 170 pounds. He weighed in at the All-American Bowl at 214. It used to be, we talked about Jeremiah Smith, and he was the, cousins. He was cousins with Geno Smith. That's how Jeremiah Smith's name has come out. I haven't heard that referenced in like over a year. Jeremiah Smith has just cemented himself as the guy. And, multi-sport checks that box up. I think the production as well. Did not have to show up to the All-American Bowl. He did not have to participate. What did he do? He put on a show. He caught the first touchdown pass in the game. Then he was a little frustrated when he didn't get the ball later. Anyone you talk to in the scouting community, generational talent comes up. He's the best I've seen out of South Florida in my 8 years living down there. Like he's the guy, and I think him getting fine-tuned by Brian Hartline is kind of the scary part. Brian Hartline seems to get the most out of his wide receivers, and he's going to get the most out of Jeremiah Smith.
So when we say generational talent, let's set the table a little bit. What does that mean? Is that Marvin Harrison Jr.? Is this a guy that is going to step on the field day 1 in Columbus and be one of the best players at his position in the country? Your personal expectations at Ohio State for Jeremiah Smith?
I saw Marvin Harrison at the Under Armour Future 50, I think, before his senior season. Did not see what he did at Ohio State, right? Tons of live exposure to Jeremiah Smith over the years. You can go back to the scouting report I have on his profile from his freshman year, potential wide receiver 1. What I'm saying is I think Jeremiah Smith can be better than Marvin Harrison. We'll see. He's got to show up, take care of business, but I think that potential is there.
I don't know if we can bet on it, but if we could, I'd probably bet the odds of Jeremiah Smith falling outside of the top 10. I feel really comfortable about that 3 to 4 years down the line. The NFL, Jeremiah Smith, one of the safest bets I think we've seen in a long time, probably since just last year. The other guy playing his football in Columbus, Caleb Downs, on the other side of the ball. All right, we talked about him. There's another guy I think they call him as well. That is Cameron Coleman, 6'3", 180 pounds. You talk about a guy that's got a 4.48 at 10.8 broad to his name. The other thing I like about this kid, well, he doubled and tripled some of the most important statistical categories this year in the state of Alabama. And Drew, I mean, he's just gotten better and better every time we have seen this kid. The other thing about him, he's still 17. He's a puppy, but he plays like a grown man. Tell me what you like about Cam Coleman.
I think any other year, he's wide receiver 1 in this class. You could say that about a number of these pass catchers. You said it's a deep, deep year at wide receiver. I just love the athletic ability. I mean, tested off the charts at the Under Armour camp. Production was kind of the question mark for us. But if you go back to his junior season, his team faced IMG Academy. He saw Ellis Robinson. He saw some of those other blue chip cornerbacks, and he produced and created separation in that setting. I think about him going to Auburn, Hugh Freeze. Tigers haven't had a 1,000-yard receiver since the 1999 season. You said you want to bet on something? You want to bet on Jeremiah Smith being a top 10 pick? I want to bet on Cam Coleman being the first 1,000-yard wide receiver for Auburn. Where can I get that action?
I feel pretty good about that. All right, so we talked about Jeremiah Smith. We've talked about Cam Coleman. I go down the list here, and you start thinking about number 3. I mean, you and I and the rest of the team at 24/7 Sports, we had some very, I would say, intense discussions about this receiver 2 spot. Who was that going to be? Cam Coleman ends up getting the nod, but I tell you what, Ryan Williams, who's really supposed to be in the class of 2025, he signed with Alabama today. Man, you talk about one of the most dynamic players in the country, and the first thing that comes to my mind is that guy right there, Devontae Smith. Not only because of the frame, he's a little bit slender, but you talk about the run after catch and downfield playmaking ability. Drew, this guy feels really rare, and I would say it is rare for somebody his age and where he is physically to be able to step on the field day 1. But when I saw him at Alabama, Mississippi, which is an absolutely loaded all-star event, he was the best player there, and he was a year younger than everybody else. Drew, I mean, this kind of just feels like the perfect chess piece for Kalen DeBoer year 1 to be able to have a guy like this step into his program.
Terry Bussey was the news of today, right? That's because we didn't know what his decision, what he was going to do. Was he going to stick with Texas A&M? Kalen DeBoer getting Ryan Williams, beyond important. All right, he's a guy that doesn't have the SEC footprint on the recruiting front. When Ryan Williams decommitted after Nick Saban announced that he was retiring, me personally, I thought, all right, this kid's going to end up at Auburn or LSU, maybe Georgia, Texas, one of those schools. And then Kalen DeBoer gets it done. It's important, and I'm going to tee you up here because you have the stats. Ryan Williams is going to play in 2024. There is no other option for the Crimson Tide. I mean, yes, they could add some guys in the transfer portal, but we're talking someone that reclassified from 2025 to 2024. The Crimson Tide are going to need him right away.
He has to. Jermaine Burton, 39 starts, career. Malik Benson, 6 starts. Ja'Cory Brooks, 10 starts. Isaiah Bond, 12 starts. That is 67 starts. Alabama is missing from their receiver room. And you talk about what are they bringing in? Guys like Kendrick Law, Kobe Prentice, who've been in that program, they've played a little bit, but these are guys that still haven't got a lot of run. Ryan Williams, you talk about that talent. It's going to be very difficult to keep off the field. The other thing about this with Kalen DeBoer, you feel a little bit more comfortable with the outlook of Ryan Williams as well. What he was able to do with guys like Rome Odunze is probably going to be a top 10 draft choice in the 2024 draft. Guys like Jalen McMillan, Jalen Polk, Jeremy Bernard, who's now in Tuscaloosa. Those were 4 or 5 guys deep that were all getting fed. There was plenty of food to go around. Yes, you had the distributor and a guy like Michael Penix. I think he's going to be looking to recreate that with Jalen Milroe and Tuscaloosa. Plenty to go around in that Kalen DeBoer
And
offense.
Austin Mack, that was their Washington's quarterback of the future. He transfers in there in Tuscaloosa. I'll say this about Ryan Williams. The reclassification stuff, I don't think it's going away. We've done the data, looked at guys that have done it. The track record isn't great. Ryan Williams, I have no questions about. 2-time Gatorade Player of the Year in the state of Alabama. He's produced a ton. He's played 39 games. He's ready to go, and we saw that in the all-star setting. He might be the exception right now when it comes to the reclassification.
A lot of eyeballs in the state of Alabama. A lot of good ones this year. Cam Coleman, Ryan Williams. But, Drew, how about this guy in the state of Florida? Some say it's your backyard, maybe not. TJ Moore. You talk about a riser, a guy that jumped over 80 spots after what he did at the All-American Bowl. And in case you didn't watch that game, well, he had 165 yards receiving. He also had 2 touchdowns as well. MVP went to Coy Parrish. I think it could have went to TJ Moore if the East would have pulled off that one. But Drew, this guy showed up, 6'3", 195 pounds. And the first thing that kind of went through my mind is, where the heck has this guy been on Clemson's roster? It's been a long time since we've seen a guy like T. Higgins or Justin Ross. Where are these dudes? And immediately I thought to myself, here he is, right? And at the end of the day, we felt very comfortable making this guy a 5-star, putting him in the top 32. Drew, we saw 19 of the top 20 receivers in the country over a 3-week period. This guy was one of the best pound for pound.
Yeah, I mean, all cycle we thought Bryant Wesco was the guy for Clemson. And we're not writing off Bryant Wesco here, but after seeing those two in the all-star setting, right, comparing their senior seasons, it was clear TJ Moore is the potential wide receiver 1, I think, for the Clemson Tigers. And we'll see how this plays out. I mean, something I'm going to be studying. All right, who does separate themselves? We think it's TJ Moore right now. Bryant Wesco has some traits as well. TJ Moore, to me, you think about potential freshman All-Americans. ACC, man, freshman wide receivers can play right away. We saw Kevin Concepcion last year, Eric Singleton at Georgia Tech. And again, I don't want to keep bringing it up and hammering this home, but Clemson, they're not in the transfer portal. And if you go back to their 2023 class, I think it was 8 guys played over 350 snaps. I mean, TJ Moore is going to be a guy for them. And you could say that about the entire recruiting class for the Tigers. So excited about him. I think his second gear, right, when the ball's deep, run under it, he can adjust. I think that's what really stands out about TJ.
Their margin of error is so much slimmer because of the way that they operate. And hey, to each their own, right? If you're going to recruit the high school level, they've had a lot of success, especially in the defensive line. You think about guys like Peter Woods, TJ Parker, you think about Christian Bentancur, right? Those are guys that can play early. You're going to need them to play early if you're not going to dip into the transfer portal. Drew, you said remember the name, right? I think that's a category that we want to talk about. Well, that's important because we got 34 receivers within the top 247. So there are a lot of guys that deserve a lot of love. Let's start with one that just kind of consistently worked his way up our board. That's Kylan Billiot heading to LSU. Guess what? Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, both those guys are going to hear their name pretty early in the next couple months for the NFL draft. I feel pretty good about what they got coming back in that receiver room. Cortez Hankton's done a phenomenal job. Might not be year 1, but this dude seems like he's up next in Baton Rouge.
Classic case of just being kind of in the middle of nowhere. Kylan Billiot, you can't find the statistics before him on Max Preps or in the newspapers or anything. I was talking to him about it at the All-American game. I said, I couldn't find any information on you. And he's like, well, how did you guys invite me to this all-star setting? I said, we believed in the tape, and we did believe in it. Shows up in San Antonio, and he's a quarterback's best friend, and that's what it should be, matching up the tape with the live evaluation. I think he's just one of these guys where you're going to look up 2-3 years from now, how was LSU the only guy on them? And they always do an excellent job in the boot, but he's an LSU receiver, long stride, high hipped, can go get the football. I think he has a very bright future there for the Tigers.
Terrebonne High School, home of Louisiana. I see you, baby. You're not in the middle of nowhere. Don't you worry about that. Another guy who had a big week at the All-American Bowl. How about our guy, Jordan Shipp, man? North Carolina is one of those programs you better check out what they're doing, because every year they just seem to pump out this talent, and you wonder where they get it from. Well, he was hooking up with the guy, Jaden Davis, who's going to play his football at Michigan. A lot of people thought, hey, is Channing Goodwin the guy? He's also heading to Ann Arbor. I don't know, Drew. This guy showed up in San Antonio, pound for pound. I thought he was one of the best players there.
Ready to play size. I'm going to steal that term from our guy, Gabe Brooks, on the 24/7 Sports scouting team. Past 2 seasons, 128 catches, 223 yards, 29 touchdowns. Production matters, right? Study the guys that are getting the job done on Saturdays and Sundays. They had huge senior seasons. I heard this from someone in Chapel Hill, right? Jordan Shipp, before he showed up at the All-American Bowl, he went through Duke Mayo Bowl practices with the Tar Heels. They said that he exceeded expectations. Remember, Tez Walker's out. I think there's a chance Jordan Shipp can get into that rotation sooner rather than later. 2
other names pay attention to here. How about Courtney Crutchfield going to Missouri? I mean, a lot of people invested in Ryan Wingo. If this was a consolation prize, I don't see much difference. Love Courtney Crutchfield. Malcolm Simmons, you think about that receiving core. A lot of people talking about Cam Coleman, Perry Thompson, Bryce Kane. What about this dude? One of the most athletic profiles in the country.